Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Academic, where I talk to students, academics, and industry experts about topics where the cyber domain intersects with the real world. My name is Ahmed Ibrahim, and I am a lecturer and researcher in cybersecurity at Edith Cowan University. This is episode number 3 with Adam Walker. Adam is a student at Edith Cowan University doing his undergraduate studies in cybersecurity. He is currently completing work-integrated learning at an organization here in Perth, where he works on projects related to penetration testing and governance risks and compliance. I have taught Adam before, and he has been an excellent student. He definitely stands out in his work ethic and how he approaches his studies. I will be talking to Adam about these and how he is working towards his aspiration for a career in digital forensics and incident response. Welcome to the Cyber Academic, Adam.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Excellent. How has the past couple of months been away from the university?
The past couple of months has been really quite full on. Going through and doing my placement at the company has been not different to what I learned in university, but certainly much more involved. Rather than having a month or two to put together an assignment, you've got a week, maybe. So it's definitely interesting.
So when it comes to deadlines, university deadline versus work placement deadlines are very different, isn't it?
They're very different, but they're also very separate as well. Where in university you're required to go and do all of this research to really gain a full and deep understanding and put everything into that piece of paper to reach that word count, and then hope that you submit it and get it right. In the workplace, they're like, cool, just give me the words on the paper and submit it. That's it. Nothing more. I don't want to know anything else.
Yeah, that's true. So, Adam, you started your degree back in 2017. Did you join university right after you finished your school?
No. So I I went a bit of an unconventional way. So I left high school under the thought that I would never go to university ever because of my scores. So I went straight out into the workplace and got a relatively good office job. And after being made redundant from there, I got a relatively not good office job. Followed that up with a decent office job, and after being made redundant from there, I went, you know what? This isn't working. And I went and did some research into the kinds of work that's going to be coming out in the computing fields. And I found that because I've always been really interested in computers, so I found computing as a whole. I didn't really want to do programming because that wasn't my kind of thing.
Yep.
And the other one that I looked into was cybersecurity, and I seemed to fit the area to a T. So I applied to go to university, and because of my scores at school were less than great, I had to go through what do they call it? The bridge program.
Right. Yep.
Yes.
So, what kind of work were you doing before that?
Okay, so before all of that, I did a fair amount of. I worked for a company called Census,
Mm-hmm.
which is otherwise known as Yellow Pages. So I worked there within the back end doing contract data entry and problem solving and just about anything you can imagine. I moved from there to work at a call center, which shall remain unnamed, and that was about the interesting level that you can imagine. It's definitely, I would say, to any of your listeners who currently or are thinking about working in a call center, it's definitely an interesting endeavor. And finally, I went to work in recruitment, and there I started off taking references, which was typing a lot, and I moved into actual recruitment until I was made redundant. So that's what I did there.
Yeah, I suppose it's not very uncommon, especially nowadays, to see people transitioning from very different kinds of background into
Yeah.
cyber, isn't it?
Mm.
And
In fact, a lot of places prefer it.
because you've got a wide array of skills, not
Yeah.
just what you learn from university. It's funny you mentioned that you didn't like programming. This is, I think, a misconception a lot of cybersecurity students have when, at various occasions when they've talked to me, they talk about the fear of programming. But you've done fairly well despite this, isn't it?
So, and that was something I was sort of when I was saying that, I was like, oh, he's going to pick up on that. So yes, when I first looked at the cybersecurity industry, I was like, I don't really want to be a programmer. Um, and it's just not something that's interesting. I don't think it's interesting. Keeping in mind, I'd never done any programming ever. So this was an assumption based on nothing. Um, so when I went and got into when I went and went through the the word escapes me at this moment, but the ECU gap program,
Yep.
the bridging program. Um, when I got into there, the first one of the first units was programming, and I ended up really quite enjoying programming in Python. And it is actually quite interesting how useful programming has been throughout my entire placement, and how useful it will continue to be,
Yep.
because there's a very clear difference between even people who are looking to get into the area called governance, regulation, and compliance,
Yep.
which is looking at policies and working in that area. um, how you can really tell when someone knows how to program, or because they can do certain things that may not be apparent to others. So it's really quite interesting.
So, in your current placement, does your work involve programming specific, or it's towards more governance related work, policy work? Would you elaborate on that?
Uh, Mine was all over the shop. So I had a rotation. So I started out in a very interesting area, which is doing a lot of research into certain aspects. So I spent my first couple of weeks doing a lot of research into not necessarily, like, oh, what is cybersecurity? Because that's what I spent, 3.5 years doing. But more like, research into specific companies, and research into exactly what information is out there which can be used. I then went into um, I went into governance, regulation, and compliance, which is GRC. Now, I do use those terms interchangeably, so please do keep that definition in there. So yeah, I went into governance, regulation, and compliance, or GRC, where I was doing a lot of work with policies, work with risk assessments, reading the various different frameworks, you know, um, doing a lot of very interesting proposal writing and things like that. So while there wasn't a lot of programming there, you could really, like, when someone was going would come out and go, there's a risk of a cyber threat by a hacker exploiting this. It's really different when someone goes, there's a risk of somebody using this, and I know this because I've done it. Like, there's a really big difference between someone just saying there is a risk versus there is a risk and I know it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
um, I then moved into an area called assurance, which is penetration testing, and that was basically all programming um, in there, because obviously the host company that I went to, they're not just going to go, you're a student, here's a whole bunch of hacking tools, you're nuts. They want to make sure that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So they had me doing some various testing things. One of the things that I ended up making was a port scanner that could uh, that was fault tolerant to network disconnections. And another one that I made was a reverse proxy application that you can use to steal passwords, essentially. So very, very interesting. And when I made that second one, I was like, oh, that's quite scary because of how easy it was. So yeah, and then when you go through and you do a penetration test, and you go, oh, I found cross-site scripting. It's one thing in a report to say you have cross-site scripting um, in your website, and it's there. It's quite different to say you have cross-site scripting in your website located here, and this is how we used it in this specific way to change the administrator's password and gain access to the admin account. So it's a very different little thing to be able to do that. So I would say to anybody who's looking at getting into the cybersec industry, don't make my mistake, and I've made a few. Don't make my mistake and think that it's not programming, because you will be. It's just much more fun than it sounds.
It's quite interesting what you just said, because what you would normally expect is students who would do things like postgrad studies would gravitate more towards governance or more senior level positions. But here you've done your undergrad degree and then have, gone towards the governance side, the GRC.
Yeah.
And is that something which is misunderstood among undergrad students who think that, once I do the undergrad degree, I should go towards this, programming or pen testing, or start from there and then move up towards, not that pen testing is not up there, but it's a very typical pathway which students take.
It's an interesting question. So the reason why I opted to go this path, so the general area that I want to get into is a place called Digital Forensics and Incident Response, or DFIR. Now, you can get there from anywhere. Most people would go the route of penetration tester, because obviously if I can break into systems, then I know what I'm looking for when responding to an incident of somebody breaking into a system. However, you can get there from anywhere. You just need to be able to do certain things. Now, the reason why I opted to go the governance, regulation, and compliance route rather than the penetration testing route is one of the things that I really identified during my studies was that I'm very, very interested in insider threat. And a lot of the insider threat stuff is covered by governance, regulation, and compliance. Because, I mean, you can absolutely do a red team, which is, for anybody who doesn't know what a red team is, which is where you have a series of ethical hackers who go out, who either attack externally, but you can also do a physical red team where you go internally, pretending to be staff members, pretending to see how you go. But in my experience, that's been quite limited.
Yeah.
However, it's much easier from a external point of view to go, these are your risks regarding your internal threat, regarding your staff members. What access do your staff members have that they probably shouldn't? Do your staff members have access to your CEO's email address? Yes or no? Those kinds of things are very, very interesting to me. So to further my sort of understanding of that area and my interest in that area, I went into the GRC route rather than the pen test route. I also, and as a caveat to that, in university, I I mean this in the nicest possible way, but I was a little bit disillusioned with GRC. I looked at it and I went, yeah, this probably isn't for me. And then when I was on my placement, I'm like, oh no, this is definitely for me. So yeah, that was sort of another interesting one.
I think that's a common experience students have, because everybody is, very attracted towards the hacking stuff, isn't it? Because that sounds more
Oh, I
cool
wasn't, but yeah.
and also very much fun. I have to admit. But the second point that you mentioned earlier was, you build your own tools, and there, when you were, talking about it, I was just thinking about, here's this collection of knowledge and skills you learned throughout your studies, coming down and focusing into this one single thing where you are actually assessing the risks and then understanding the technology, understanding the threat landscape, and then also putting in these programming skills where you are actually building your own set of tools. So it's not just about using off-the-shelf products.
Yes, a lot of pen testers will use their own tools in some instances. Like, sometimes it's if you're setting up, uh, think of my reverse proxy program. There are definitely programs out there that do that far better than what my little reverse proxy program does it. Like far, far, far better. No questions asked. They could walk all over my little program and trample it into the dust. Like it's nothing. But if you're just doing something really targeted, like really, really, really targeted, because I sat next to another penetration tester while they were doing something, and they were setting up a off-the-shelf program which does reverse proxies. And I think it probably took them about 20 minutes as an experienced person to set up this program. Whereas the program that I built, I could go, cool, I want you to mimic this website, and it would. So yeah, it's definitely intriguing. Um, but yeah, the automated ones are very can be very complicated, but it depends. Like if you're running a campaign that's going over a week or so, my little program is not going to cut the mustard. You need that really nice big beefy program in the background. But if it's just something really quick,
Yeah.
there you go. So yeah.
Do you plan on releasing it open source or it's your own?
This one is my own for the moment.
Okay.
Um, purely, I mean, I do have it up on GitHub, but it's currently as a private, just because there are a few kinks in it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereby the actual program itself, towards the end, one of the major issues, especially when you're looking at mimicking a very big website, say Google, for their login utilities, there's quite a lot of network activity which happens, and your proxy needs to be able to catch all of that and reverse all of it. And mine wasn't quite there. It's still a work in progress. And that's one of the major things. Like I sort of view it like cryptography. Never roll your own, but also do. So
I'm
yeah.
going to remember that one. Why did you decide to go into work placement rather than doing a project on your own?
So that was that's an interesting one. So when I started university, keep in mind that my scores from high school were not good. For instance, not good enough to get into university. When I started the bridging program, I sort of went in and I was like, my mindset going in wasn't the best, and I will admit that out and out. My mindset going in was cool. If I make it through this bridging program, like if I make it into university, my whole thing is that I'm going to go through and I'm going to get my work placement, and you know, my 50% average that I'm going to have the entire way through university. I need to bring that up a bit, because I think in order to get into work conducted learning, you need 70. So I was like, if I manage to get something good, if I manage to get 70, if I just manage to scrape in there, I will take my work conducted learning, because I wanted to get out and see what the industry was like.
Yeah.
And then that didn't quite eventuate the way that my internal thought processes worked. But one of the things is one of the reasons that I attribute to the level of everything that I've achieved is I always keep my promises to myself. So regardless of the fact that I I didn't keep the promise to myself of not scoring very well, and I will forgive myself for that. That's okay.
It's forgivable.
Um, yeah, but I think that if you go into a situation and you say to yourself, "Okay, this is what I'm doing, and this is my desired end goal," if you do better than what you thought you were going to do, and your desired end goal is achievable and respectable by completing that,
Yep.
I think you should. So basically, it came down to um, do I keep my promise to myself or not? And I opted to keep my promise to myself. But the major reason was that the gaining of like I think I probably learnt more about the varied industry areas and more about what would actually be expected because you're in a company, you're getting feedback from people who are very good. um, you gain a lot of knowledge very quickly, and you're also able to display your capabilities to the host company, which is a good thing for you if you're trying to get into the industry.
That's true.
But yeah.
Oh, so coming in from your high school with not very good scores, but ending up scoring straight HDs through your whole degree program. That's quite an achievement. So, what's your secret formula, Adam?
My secret, I don't know, like it's something that because I've had a few students ask me that over the years, like, what do you do? And I'm like, I just do the work. Like the the general, there is more to it. Um, One of the things that I've noticed that I do that I don't know whether it's a good thing is use communication skills while at university with your lecturers. You know, don't be afraid that when your lecturer is standing at the front of the room and asking a question, don't be afraid to be wrong because they're not expecting you to know everything. So when they throw out a question like, uh, what was it? We were in information warfare, which I know is no longer a unit that's included, which is upsetting for me. But we were in information warfare, and the lecturer at the front of the room uh, was asking a question about, I think it was operations security or something like that. And due to a random happenstance, completely random, I had recently been listening to a separate podcast, funnily enough, on a few of the varying areas of a certain war, which was the war in Vietnam, I believe, which was where the term operation security was coined because of things that were happening. So I actually had a fair amount of knowledge on operations security, and I was able to put my hand up and basically say, this is where operation security came from, this is why, this is how they developed it, so on and so forth. You end up looking really good, even though it was completely by luck and there was nothing to it. And I have also put my hands up in many instances and been completely and totally wrong about the things that I said. But it still puts you onto sort of like a radar of the lecturer, and it allows you to do things like going in and just asking questions, which is the other thing is, and I think you can probably attest from from your time with me, I ask a lot of questions, and generally speaking, more than I'm sure anyone was comfortable with.
Now, I think you've marked a very important point there because first of all, asking questions is something you should continuously do. And there will be times when lecturers are wrong even. So I don't think anybody should be afraid to ask questions. The worst that can happen is you'll be wrong, right? But one thing that's probably very different about university studies is that the discussion that happens in the classroom or whether it is online, especially nowadays, the discussion actually enriches the learning experience, not for the person who is having the discussion, but also for the rest of the class. So, like the example you just gave about operational security, um, obviously that wouldn't have been covered in the syllabus, but however, because you contributed that knowledge in the class, say that's benefited everybody else in the classroom. So I think it's such an important thing to have that dynamic, interactive mode of communication in the class. And I know I can attest to you being somebody who asked a lot of questions, and it was all very pleasant. At times there were too many questions, but still I was so happy because somebody was actually asking questions about this, and that's how you learn the additional stuff that's not just covered in the lecture, and that sparks your curiosity about that the unit. And you actually covered the question that I was going to ask again. One thing that I remember about you, Adam, was before you started the semester, you were going to do network security fundamentals. But before the semester started, you came to my office one day and asked me what are the readings I should be doing because you wanted to prepare before the semester. Now, is this something that you do for every semester?
This is something that I do for every semester that I'm worried about. So there were certain courses which I identified, and this is the other thing. Know your weaknesses. Know where know where you actually don't know what you're doing. And that's really hard for some people and very hard for myself, is to admit that, okay, for example, with network security, I really had to look at, I looked at the outline, I looked at, I don't think I had access to the readings yet, but I looked at the various different areas in the handbook, and I went, I don't know anything about any of these, um, and I'm in trouble. So, going in and saying, what should I be reading? Because the worst thing that I think you can do, um, is to follow the Doctor Google approach, which is essentially to say, I don't know anything about firewalls. What is a firewall? Because you may find the exact information that you need in the exact book and be able to read everything that you know, or you get lost in a Reddit hole that goes for 6 or 7 pages about what a firewall is when it's not what a firewall is. So being able to go in and say, hey, what should I be looking at? What should I be reading? What should I be, investigating, to sort of give you that primer so that you can really come into the unit fully focused, first of all, but also with a bit of knowledge, so that when you're reading those first couple of slides into sort of, you know, what is a firewall? What is a packet? How does it travel across a network? Where does it go? What does it interact with? All of that kind of thing. You already know it, and reading the lecture material sort of adds another level of knowledge to the thing that you've gained from your online research. Uh, Another very good example was, again, another unit which has been axed, but the unit of Unix and C, because I had no experience in C at all, and I had limited experience with Linux. I could move through a Linux environment with CD, and I could move a file with MV, and I could also print where I was with PWD, but that was the end of my experience. And I remember going to the lecturer at the time and saying, I don't know anything about this. Do you have any experience? And they returned with a book that was not on the suggested reading thing, because it wasn't a purchasable book. It was just a book that they knew about. It was a free book, and I can't remember for the life of me what the title of it was, but it was essentially, here's how you use Linux properly, correctly in all of the various different areas. Here's a series of commands. And he said, go read this. And I read that, and then I was able to do very well in the unit. So yeah, being able to sort of come in and ask those questions and sort of do that is very, very good, because, and especially when you're not sure exactly on what you're going to be doing,
Yeah.
it provides you with that background.
Something else that I also recall, Adam, from teaching you was at the time, when it was time to submit the assignments, you also were very, see, I specifically remember you running after me for a lot of feedback. And surprisingly, this is something I always encourage students to do, but I know that you've done that as well. So has that been helpful in your experience in other units as well?
Yes. My number one rule is uh, the first draft that you create, the first thing that you get feedback on is not your final assignment. And if you don't get feedback and you submit something that has not been seen by the lecturer, good luck to you. Because yeah, the ultimate goal for me was not this is going to sound really weird. The ultimate goal for me was not to achieve high marks in the units. That was the ultimate goal for me, was to learn as much as I could and display my knowledge. The marks were just a way of keeping score. Um, the, the general gist and the reason why I sought so much feedback was because I wanted to make sure that I really understood the actual information that I was putting in. I knew that that was going to translate into marks, but that wasn't my focus. I wasn't like, I really want to get, 98.9. I didn't care about that. I wanted to know, was what I was saying correct? Because if it is, I'm going to get the marks anyway. Doesn't matter.
That's pretty cool, Adam. So, keeping promises to yourself,
Yes.
doing the work, asking questions, knowing your weaknesses, and learning to gain knowledge, but not the marks. So, is there anything else you want to, uh, you know, say to current or future students to be successful in their studies?
So yeah, there is one more thing that I wanted to add in, and it sort of goes hand in hand with doing the work. But I want to preface it with, this is only applicable to those who can go on campus. Because I know that there's a fair amount of students who have to sort of come in remotely, and this advice does extend but doesn't translate well. Um, and it's show up. You know, throughout my entire university degree, going all the way through, you'll see on day one, everyone is in that room. There is, the entire lecture theatre is full of people, and sometimes you can't even get a seat. I remember in programming principles, I think, the first week I was 2 minutes late to the lecture because I was trying to get a car park, because car parks are wonderful. And I remember having to sit on the floor in the front of the lecture hall that was the one of the biggest lecture halls in ECU, because everyone was there. Week 5, you could almost throw a ball into the actual lecture theatre and you wouldn't hit anybody. While it does sort of extend to the online students, because you can show up, quote unquote, by listening to the lecture things, it's not quite the same, but you can still you can still ask questions and do that kind of thing. But turning up is incredibly important, because there are certain things that I found where, at the end of the lecture, just being able to go down and talk to the lecturer and be like, hey, so I'm having problems with this specific area of my assignment. And rather than having to compose all of that into an email and then wait 2 days for the response, and then update and amend, and you've sort of got that back and forth, and being able to do that is quite helpful. One of my mentors, one of my role models that I had for a very, very long time, said, you know, knowing what you're talking about is 10%. It's 10%. Turning up is the other 90% to gaining what it is, because I can know the theory of absolutely everything, but if you don't turn up to those lectures and you don't sit there and listen and go through everything, what are you doing? And that is sort of the biggest thing is, you see a decline in students, and every single year I've gone, why are you turning up and then going away?
Yeah.
And as I did say, like, for anybody who has to study online because of whatever reason,
Yeah.
turn up by turning up to the online lectures, listening to them, and then asking your questions of the lecturer. For example, always get a Teams call with your lecturer. As I think Ahmed can attest, I did a lot during the COVID pandemic. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's very true. But especially in Western Australia, I think we've been very fortunate to go back to the classroom
Yeah.
in second semester. But in the first semester, we were mostly in lockdown, and all of our courses were delivered online. Was that challenging for you because you've been very used to physically being in the classroom?
I don't think challenging is the right word. I think extremely stressful is. I did not cope well with not being able to go to the classroom. So yeah, it was definitely one of the most stressful series of 4 units I think I've ever had, because I wasn't able to go to the classroom and do anything. It was all recordings, and yeah, I think there were several times of me sitting in my computer chair, just staring at the screen, going, I just want to ask this question.
Yeah.
That's all I want to ask, and I can't. So yeah, no, it was definitely a stressful time.
But fortunately, I mean, you did well. You still ended up scoring HDs in all those units. Um,
Yeah, yeah. It was
so,
just a lot harder.
yeah. So, Adam, just to wrap up, what's next? What do you want to do after your will? What kind of career or job area are you aiming to go towards?
Next for me is first of all to hopefully graduate. Um, got to get my final report in and do all of that. So hopefully I'll graduate. Fingers crossed. It's a joke for everybody listening.
Yeah.
And and then my plan is to enter into the industry doing governance, regulation, and compliance. Uh, and eventually to work my way into, and we're not talking like a year or 2 years. I'm talking like 5-10 years down the track,
Yeah.
to work my way into digital forensics or a digital forensics adjacent field. But I think for the time being, getting in the exposure to governance, regulation, and compliance, and getting into those sort of really core areas and learning, I think is a very, very important aspect of my future career progress. And yeah, who knows? Maybe eventually I'll come back and do a master's. We'll see.
Well, whatever you decide to do, Adam, I wish you all the best
Thank you. I wish you all the
in
best
your
too.
future endeavors. Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for joining me in this podcast.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me in this episode. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at AI8RAHIM. That's AI number 8 RAHIM. And leave a comment or keep an eye out for the next episode.